Responding to the environment in humans. In this presentation, I will be doing a study on the nervous system, which will be the first part on this series, and then it will be followed by the eye, then subsequently the ear. Now let us go on to how to study paper one topics based on the exam's structure. So for examination purposes, this topic is structured in the following way. We have the diagram side, a part that deals with labeling or drawing a structure, and then also stating the functions of the individual parts. It is therefore recommended that you practice how to draw the parts of the human nervous system, and I will be laying emphasis on those unique parts that you need to know. Secondly, the topic explores the processes that forms part of the human response to the environment. Uh, Processes such as reflex action, accommodation, hearing, and maintenance of balance, pupillary mechanism, etc. These processes they form part of the general functions of the organs that forms part of the nervous system. And we'll also be exploring how to approach those processes where you have to explain or describe. Lastly, the topic also deals with the disorders or the diseases of the organ or the part that is under study. So, with regards to the nervous system, we will be looking at those diseases. Now, you have to know my entire presentation is strictly based on the examination guidelines, and that is what you have on your screen. So the examination guidelines actually gives you information about the topic, that is human response to the environment. It's a term 2 topic, and it's going to take about 4 weeks to cover it fully. It is part of the paper 1 content, and it contributes 54 marks to the entire paper 1 question. The entire question paper is 150 marks in total, and out of it, more than one third of it is about human response to the environment. So that should let you know how important the topic is. The human response to the environment is divided into three components. We have there is the nervous system itself, then the human eye, and then the human ear. So in this presentation, I'm going to actually cover the human nervous system. But to do so, we have to go through the introduction. The introduction addresses two aspects or two systems in the human body that are involved in our ability to respond to the environment. So it states here that the nervous system, which involves nerves, and the endocrine system, which involves hormones, are two components that help humans respond to the environment. That means before you go into the exams hall or the exams room, you have to know the fact that the nervous system and the endocrine system they are involved in enabling humans to respond to the changes that occurs within the environment, whether it is hot or cold, whether it's dark or bright, whether it is actually wet or dry. All these changes in environment needs to be known by the individual. The human system, the human body knows it and is able to respond to it due to the nervous system and then the endocrine system. Then we go on to the human nervous system properly. In this study, I will be exploring the need for a nervous system. Why do we need a nervous system? Why should we have a brain? Why should we have a spinal cord? Why should we even bother about what is going on within our environment? So this section explains the need or the importance of the human nervous system. So one here it is explained it help us to react to stimuli. Okay, so in response to the statement here, we're looking at reaction to stimuli, And the stimuli can be external, that is from the outside, or internal, that is from inside our body. So we need to respond or react to the environment, whether it is inside our body or outside our body, and we have to be able to do so. It is the reason why we have a nervous system. Hence, we need to know the meaning of the word stimuli. Stimuli is the plural form of the word stimulus. A stimulus is anything that can cause you to respond. For example, heat. For example, pain. For example, water. Anything that will cause you to respond is called a stimuli. Secondly, why do we need a nervous system? We need it for coordination of the various activities of the body. So without the nervous system, you won't be able to control your hands, you won't be able to control your legs, you can't do anything because you do not have a nervous system. So this section is very important. It explains why we need a nervous system, and one is reaction to stimuli, two, coordination of the various activities of the body. So these are simple answers. They are rarely asked in exams. So make sure you get used to it. Then we have the central nervous system itself. And over here, we are told that we need to know that the brain and the spinal cord are protected by the meninges. And this is one key area that you should expect questions on in exams. These are stuff you need to know before you go into the exams room. You need to know the fact that the brain and the spinal cord, they are protected by meninges. There are other forms of protection, but this kind of protection is something you need to know as you go into the exams room. Then the second bulletin deals with two things. One, location, and two, functions of the following parts of the brain. So you have to know the location of the brain and the location of the spinal cord. But then under the brain, there are four structures that you need to know. These are the four components, only four things about the brain that you need to know for examination sake. And there are two things to know about them. You have to know their location. That is, you have to know the location of the cerebrum, location of the cerebellum, corpus callosum, and medulla oblongata. And then secondly, you have to know their functions. See, so not just one function. Functions, meaning you have to know more than one functions of each. I think there should be two or three things you know about each of the following structures here. And then lastly, too, you have to know the location of the spinal cord and then also its functions. Then once we are done with the central nervous system, we go into the peripheral nervous system. What are we supposed to know about the peripheral nervous system? Once again, there are two things to know about the peripheral nervous system. One, you have to know the location, and then secondly, you have to know the functions. Okay, so you have to know about these two things. And then here we have been told the peripheral nervous system, it is made up of cranial and spinal nerves. Those are two things about it that you need to know. But then this system is subdivided into two systems. These are not the systems, these are the parts or the structures that constitute the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. But then the peripheral nervous system is made up of two systems, and we have to know one is the autonomic nervous system, and the second one is the somatic nervous system. But then this examination guideline lays emphasis on the autonomic nervous system. That means you need to know it. And what are we supposed to know about the autonomic nervous system? You have to know again its location and functions. Okay, so we have to know the locations and functions of the autonomic nervous system. And then here we have sympathetic and parasympathetic sections. That is the branch or the component. In other words, the autonomic nervous system is subdivided into two sections. We have the sympathetic sections, and then we have the parasympathetic sections. Take note, it is sympathetic sections and parasympathetic sections. And then the peripheral nervous system is subdivided into the cranial nerves and spinal nerves. Now, if you are very observant, you will notice something about what we have, the three main things we have covered today. That's the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and autonomic nervous system. They all have something in common. When you are studying it, when you are studying these three sections, There are two things you need to know about them. One is the location, and the second one, the functions. Same applies to the peripheral nervous system. Location, function. Then here to you go to location and function. If you can focus on these two, you won't miss anything in exams. At least with a little common sense, you will be able to get high marks. Then the last part deals with the structure and functioning of a nerve, and hence we need to know the definition of a nerve. And you have a short information on it. What are nerves? Nerves send and carry signals to and from all parts of the body and are made up of neurons. And here you have been told there are two neurons we need to focus on. You're going to discover later on there are three, but then there are two that we need to know. We have sensory and motor. And as a confirmation, in the second bulletin in this exams guide, you are made to know, okay, that you have to know these two neurons before you go into the exams room. What are you supposed to know about these two neurons? You have to know their functions. When they are put side by side like this, in many cases, it is easy to be asked to differentiate between sensory and motor neuron. Anytime you have to differentiate, you just draw a table and then you have it there. So those are the two neurons you need to concentrate on with regards to their functions. But then the third bulletin adds something more to it. Here we are told you have to know the structure. The structure here deals with the appearance or the diagram. So you have to know the structure and functions of parts of one, the sensory neuron, and then here we have the motor neurons. So with, and then he goes on to say using diagrams. In other words, you should learn how to draw them. So there are two ways you can go about this. You have to know the structure, and in knowing it, either you'll be given the structure, then you label it, or you state the functions, or you identify it, or you can be made to draw. But then in drawing, using diagrams, what and what are you supposed to know about the parts? Because here it talks about parts. What and what are you supposed to know about the parts? So here you have to know the nucleus, cell body, cytoplasm, myelin sheath, axon, and dendrites. So those are the parts you need to know. What are you supposed to know about the part? Let's go back to the beginning here. You have to know the structure of the nucleus. You have to know how it appears. So that when you see a cell body, you know that this is a cell body. So that you can identify the myelin sheath and you might be able to know the difference between an axon and a dendrite. Then you need to also know the functions of each part here. That's the nucleus, cell body, cytoplasm, myelin sheath, axon, and dendrite. So these are the stuff you need to know. Now, in the next few minutes, I'm going to lay emphasis on all these sections that we have here. I'm going to touch on the introduction, the need for nervous system, the central nervous system, peripheral, autonomic, and structure and function of the nervous system. And then I'll conclude it with the remaining parts. So let us zoom in quickly as we go through them again. In the next session, I've converted this into a variable note where I've actually laid emphasis on some very important things that we shouldn't forget. So here we have importance of responding to the environment. Why should we care about the changes that are taking place in the environment, and why should we respond? So one is to ensure the survival of an organism. With regards to humans, it is to ensure our survival. Secondly is to maintain our internal conditions. With regards to humans, we need to respond to the environment so that we can maintain our internal conditions. Now, check this out. To achieve this, that is, to enable us to respond to the environment, to survive, and to maintain internal environment, we humans, we have two coordinating systems, two systems working together. And these two systems function together to allow us to adapt to changes within the environment. So since you have been told that there are two systems, let us go and explore those two systems that are enabling us to adapt to the environment. So over here, we have to know about the systems. It says state the systems that enables humans to respond to the environment. One is the nervous system. If you remember from the previous document, we saw it involves nerves. And then the other one is the endocrine system. It involves hormones. Because these two systems are directly connected, in most cases they can be integrated in one question. They can combine them in one question, or you can be made to differentiate between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Now, let's look at this. So, these are the two systems that are actually helping us to respond to the environment. Meaning, without these two systems, we will not be able to respond to the environment. In the next slide, I'll be taking each system and I'll be just touching on them briefly, especially the endocrine system. I'll just talk about it briefly, but then I'm going to lay emphasis. I'm going to go deeper in the I would go deeper on the nervous system itself because that's the topic. So, why do we need a nervous system? Why should we have a brain? Why should we care when we touch a hot object or when we step on a needle? This allows reaction to stimuli. The stimuli can be external to internal. So, we need a nervous system so that we can react to stimuli. Secondly, we need a nervous system to ensure coordination. Another word for coordination is the word control of the various activities of the body. So now that we know why we have a nervous system, let us zoom in and explore the components of the nervous system. So the nervous system is divided into two sections or two systems. That is a system within a system. So it's divided into two systems. There is the central nervous system, and then there is the peripheral nervous system. So that is what you have here. We have the peripheral nervous system, and then it consists mostly of nerves and ganglions. Those are the structures you see coming out of the spinal cord. So that the spinal cord, it is very centralized in the body. On top of it is the brain, and then coming out of the spinal cord and the brain are these hundreds of thousands of structures called peripheral nerves. So the human nervous system, remember, it enables us to react or respond to stimuli. And before you can react to stimuli, the stimuli will have to be there. You can't react to something that is not there. So if you take the human body, this is how it operates. Let's say there is this person is actually shot with a gun or an arrow, or there's an electric shock, or somebody throws a stone at the person, and then the stone hits this side of the body. Okay, how would the person know that he or she has been hit? So first of all, there must be a stimuli, there must be pain there, but then the brain doesn't understand pain. The communication within the nervous system does not involve pain and heat. Actually, there's a different language spoken by the brain and the spinal cord and the rest of the structures. The language they speak or how they communicate is different from what we may call pain or heat. So for the person to really know that he or she has been shot or electrocuted or has stepped on a needle or has been stabbed or something, first of all, an impulse will have to be generated. And to generate an impulse, there must be a stimuli. There are special nerves. You see, we all know, at least you can tell this is the head, and inside the head, there is a brain. You know that. And then there is this thick line going throughout the length of the body. That is the spinal cord. And you see these tiny structures like threads or like cables coming out from the body. They are like wires that is actually wiring the entire body, trying to connect the entire body to the brain, because the brain controls the entire body. But then for the brain to know what is happening at this part of the body, it needs channels or cables or wires. We call them nerves that will pick up the information and then transmit the information into the spinal cord. Then the spinal cord will also carry the information and send it to the brain. Then the brain will now tell you what's going on. So this person here was shot at or was stabbed or something painful happened to him on this part of his body. But then look at where the brain is and look at where the impact is. How will the person know what is happening? That is why there are these nerves here, these structures here, that is always connected to every part, every single area on the surface of the body. This is the surface of the body, that's the skin, because the impact actually will occur in that area of the skin. It's the skin that will have to be damaged for you to know what is happening. So if a person is shot at or if there's an electric shock, it will first affect the skin area, and each area of the skin is connected to a neuron. So you see what is happening. There's a signal that will be picked up from here, from the surface of the area that is affected, and then the signal will now run through one of the cable. You see, the signal will not jump from here into the brain. It goes through one of the cable. And what's going to happen is that once the bullet or the stabbing occurs, or the person is electrocuted on this side of the brain, immediately an impulse is generated by the nerves. An impulse is generated, and then it is sent to the brain via the peripheral nerves to the spinal cord. So the skin, which is one of the sense organs, will now pick up the impact, or the impact from the gunshot or the electric shock, and then it will convert it into an impulse. You call it pain, the brain doesn't call it pain immediately. It will first depend on the information from the skin, because the skin is what covers the body. If the skin is torn, then the skin will convert that situation into an impulse. So that's why he stated that an impulse is generated, and then it is now sent to the brain. But how will it get to the brain? It is sent to the brain via the peripheral nerves. So these are the peripheral nerves, the nerves that are on the surface of the body, and it will actually go through the internal part of the body, and then it will be channeled through the spinal cord. So there we have the spinal cord here, and then it goes to the brain. So now the brain will get to know what has just happened, and then the brain will now have to actually receive the information, that is the impulse, from the receptor, that's the skin, that came through the peripheral nerves and the spinal cord. And then what it will do is that it will interpret it, and then it will take a decision. It will tell the body what to do. And now all these things will happen in a split second. In less than a second, all these events will occur. That is why when you step on a hot needle, the moment you step on it, your body reacts. So we're going to explore how these events actually takes place within the body, how the brain and the spinal cord are involved in this situation. So, like we saw earlier on, the nervous system consists of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So we have the two systems here, the peripheral nervous system, and then we also have the central nervous system. So let us see where they are located within the body, the two systems. If you take the human body and you draw a line through it like a cross, you actually split the body longitudinally from top to bottom, vertically, into two. And you actually also split them into two equal halves. So you can see there is a part that grows vertically downwards, okay, and this section here, okay, that is the yellow portion here, this section, this vertical section, and that section here, they occupy a central location of the human body. And it is for this reason that we call it the central nervous system. So the central nervous system, it consists of the brain, which is actually positioned to be within the middle portion of the human body. And then we have going through the length, that's the spinal cord. And these two forms the central nervous system. Now the rest of the system, they actually go through the rest of the body, both on the surface and mostly on the surface, actually, both on the surface and then just within the subsurface. And this section here, that is anything outside the blue line, the purple area, is what is called the peripheral nervous system. They go through the entire length of the human body so that there can be communication between the legs and the brain, the fingers, and then also the brain. Then when we went to the exams guide, we were told how the brain is and the spinal cord are protected. So over here, we are made to understand that the meninges are the main protective substance or material or membrane that surrounds both the brain and the spinal cord. So you have to know this for certain. The brain and the spinal cord are both protected by their meninges. But then there are other forms of protection. Remember, you have to know the brain is actually inside the cranium. Okay, so this is the brain, and actually this is the head. And the bones of the bone of the head bone, is what is called the skull. But then the brain is not found in every part of the skull, because this part of the head okay, or this part of the skull does not have any brain there. So over here, this curvy part of the skull is what is called the cranium. So that's the cranium. If you want to find the brain, you can't find the brain here in this part in the jaws. You'll find it in the cranium. So there are other protective parts of the brain. We have the cranium. The cranium protects only the brain. So the brain is here, and the cranium, that is the round bone that encloses the cerebrum and the cerebellum and the other parts of the brain. But here you can see that's the spinal cord here, and the spinal cord is outside the cranium, and that is why here it is stated the cranium protects only the brain. And then there is a third protective area or protective line around the central nervous system, that is the cerebrospinal fluid. And now this fluid, it surrounds both the spinal cord and then the entire brain. So that is it. Those are the three layers of protection for the brain and the spinal cord. But then, for examination purposes, know that the meninges are the main material that protects both the brain and the spinal cord. And then we move on to the functions of the following parts. So, like we referred to the document earlier on, we need to know the functions of the following parts of the brain. You have to know the functions of the cerebrum. You have to know the functions of the cerebellum. You have to know the functions of the corpus callosum. You have to know the functions of the medulla oblongata, and you have to know the functions of the spinal cord. Now, you have to know all these things using a diagram. So over here, I have a diagram for you. You can also refer to your notes because I've already given you these materials. And over here, we have the cerebrum, and you have to know three things about it. You have to know the location. You have to know how they look like. You should actually practice how to draw a label. And then you need to know the functions, and then you have to also know the effects if it is damaged. So over here, we have the location. The cerebrum is located in the cranium. It is directly above the cerebellum. What are its functions? It controls voluntary actions. It receives and interprets sensation from sense organs. And it is also involved in higher thought processes such as memory, thinking, learning. And then what will happen if it is damaged? If the cerebrum is damaged, it will lead to memory loss, inactivity, and also sensation from sense organs will not be received and hence be interpreted. That means you wouldn't know what is going on. What about the medulla oblongata? That is the medulla oblongata here. It is the bulged part of the spinal cord. It's actually located above the spinal cord. Is the tip of the spinal cord. And what are its functions? It transmits nerve impulses between the spinal cord and the brain, and also controls involuntary actions, things that are not under our control, things such as heartbeat and breathing. And what are the effects if it is damaged? Consequences of a damaged medulla oblongata. To answer that, you have to know the functions of the medulla oblongata, and then you negate it. You write it in the opposite form. So how do you write it in the opposite form? This is what will happen. Since the medulla oblongata controls involuntary actions such as heartbeat and breathing, if it is damaged, breathing and heartbeat will stop. Once it stops, it will lead to the death of the person, since there will be no transmission of nerve impulses between brain and spinal cord. Then we go to the spinal cord. Where is it located? It is located in the vertebral column. What does it do? It transmits nerve impulses from the peripheral nervous system to the brain. That is its functions. It also brings about reflex action to protect the body from injuries. Here, I did not include the effect if damaged, but you can do that. What are the ways of explaining that? Explain the consequence of a damaged spinal cord. So this is what you do. You take the functions and then you write the opposite of it. So here the spinal cord is supposed to transmit nerve impulses from the peripheral nervous system to the brain. So if it is damaged, it would not be able to transmit nerve impulses from the peripheral nervous system to the brain. In other words, it can lead to paralysis. It will not also be able to bring about reflex action to protect the body from injuries. That means the body will not be protected. Then we go to the corpus callosum. Where is it located? It is located between the right and left hemispheres of the brain. That is where you find the corpus callosum. Check and know how it is drawn. You have to know the structure and its location. What does it do? What are its functions? It connects the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, allowing communication between the two hemispheres. So, what are the consequences of a damaged corpus callosum? If the corpus callosum is damaged, it will lead to a disruption of communication between the two sides of the brain, and it will lead to difficulty in learning, memory, speech, communication, maintaining balance, and performing voluntary activities. So, those are the things you need to know. There are three things you need to know: the location, function, and effect which if damaged. Then we go to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is actually part of the endocrine system, but like we saw earlier on, the endocrine system involving hormones and the nervous system involving nerves are involved in enabling the body to respond to the environment. So at least we have it here. Let's look at it. Hypothalamus, where is it located? It is located below the cerebrum. What are its functions? It is a control center for hunger, thirst, sleep, body temperature, and emotions. And what are the consequences if the hypothalamus is damaged? If the hypothalamus is damaged, eating and sleeping and emotional disorder will occur, or it will lead to eating, sleeping, and emotional disorders. It will also lead to imbalances in the body temperature and as well as osmoregulation. And lastly, what about the cerebellum? That is the cerebellum. Get the spelling correct. Don't confuse cerebellum and cerebrum. Cerebrum is larger, is the largest portion of the brain. Cerebellum is the smallest portion of the brain. And like the way it looks like a leaf over here. So that's one of the ways by which you can identify the cerebellum. Where is it located? You can see here that is the cerebrum, which is on top of it, and below it, that's the cerebellum. So here we wrote that the cerebellum is located right below the cerebrum. So the cerebrum is big and then the cerebellum is small. There are two hemispheres of the cerebellum, and then there are two hemispheres of the cerebrum. Both are actually two hemispheres, half of a circle that is actually within the cranium. What are its functions? It coordinates all voluntary movements and controls muscle tension to maintain balance. What are the consequences if it is damaged? If the cerebellum is damaged, it will lead to loss of voluntary coordination and balance. It will lead to decreased muscle tone. It will lead to poor muscle control, resulting in difficulty in movement and speech. You need muscles to speak. So if the cerebellum is damaged, your speech becomes also affected. You won't be able to communicate properly. I have also integrated this into realistic notes here. Even the one we just read is a variable note, so I've also placed them into real notes. You have to know the functions, you have to be able to learn them very well, know what goes on. It's the same as what we just saw. I've just summarized them in this part, in this format for you. Then I've also transformed the explanation on the consequence if damage for you. So for you to be able to explain, because explaining the consequence of a damaged part carries a lot of marks, minimum 3-4 marks. So for you to really get the full marks, first of all, you have to first know the normal functions of the structure. Let's say the spinal cord. What does it do? Here, it transmits nerve impulses between the brain and the spinal cord. It also controls reflex actions. So what to be the consequence if the spinal cord is damaged? Now, this is what you do. You just take the functions again, you write the same functions, but then you have to insert the words, there will be no, and then you continue. If you don't bring in the word and you write the functions, you are going to be wrong. But for you to be able to explain the consequence of a damaged spinal cord, you just insert the words, there will be no, then you continue with the normal functions. There will be no transmission of nerve impulses between the brain and the body. And here you saw in the normal functions, it controls normal reflex actions. But because it is damaged, now you just put in the word, there will be no reflex actions. That is how you explain. Just put in those words. These are the words that is used for explaining the consequence of a damaged part. So first of all, you have to master the functions. You have to know it very well so that when it comes to explanation, you just insert the words. There will be no, then you are done. You got your full marks. Same applies to this one, cerebrum, sorry. For you to know the function of cerebrum, for you to explain the effective damage, you have to know the functions of cerebrum. And without knowing the functions of cerebrum, you can't explain the consequence if damage. So over here, you negate the statement. You put the statement in the negative. How do you put it in the negative? You just put the word there will be no, or there will be a loss of. You see, loss of means is also in the negative statement. Cerebellum too, the same thing. This, you write the same. If the functions are here, but then you start by saying lack of, or you can simply say there will be no balance. You just put in there will be no balance. And now, once you do that, you have to explain the consequence of uh, if the part is damaged. Again, corpus callosum, it connects the left and the right hemisphere. So if you want to explain the consequence if it is damaged, you write the same functions, but then you have to insert the word there will be no connections. Then you are done. Same applies to the medulla oblongata. It controls vital involuntary actions such as breathing, heartbeat, and blood pressure. If it is damaged, how will you explain it? You write the same functions. You have to know the functions itself, but then how do you assign it properly? You just insert the words. There will be no, then you add the functions. You write the normal functions. You are fine and you are good to go. So that means for you to explain, you need to know the functions. And once you know the functions, you can do both. You can write the functions itself and you can explain the consequence if there is a damage. Then we go on to the location. We saw it earlier. Each part of the brain has its own location. Where is the brain located? It's in the cranium. Where is the cerebrum located? In the frontal part of the cranium. Where is the cerebellum located? Below the cerebrum in the cranium. Where is the corpus callosum? In between the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. What about the medulla oblongata? Located below the cerebellum or on top of the spinal cord. Where's the spinal cord located? In the vertebral column. These answers can give you 1 or 2 marks. And they are very important thing to know. So that is the location. Then we go on to the locations and functions of the peripheral nervous system, like we saw earlier on. Remember, it is made up of the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. And we need to know um, what these nerves are made up of. There are 12 cranial nerves and there are 21 spinal nerves. I will recommend, I want you to go and find out the differences between cranial nerves and spinal nerves in terms of their functions and location. Then we go on to the functions of the peripheral nervous system as dictated by the exam guide. So we need to know what this peripheral nervous system does. It does 3 things: connects, transmits, and regulates. So let's start. What does it connect? It connects the central nervous system to the organs, limbs, and skin. The limbs refers to your legs and your hands. What does it transmit? It transmits impulses to and from the central nervous system. And lastly, it regulates. What does it regulate? Involuntary activities, activities that are not under our control, things that you are not conscious of, things that you do not decide. Those are the things we call involuntary activities. To volunteer means you are willingly doing it. So these activities, they are not being done by you. You are not the one doing it. It's being done by the body under the influence of the peripheral nervous system. So we have activities such as heartbeat and breathing. These are stuff we do not control. They are actually an integral part, and they are automatic systems that functions within the body. Then we go on to the peripheral nervous system. It consists of 2 subsystems. We have the autonomic nervous system, and then we have the somatic nervous system. Then we need to define what autonomic nervous system is. The autonomic nervous system, it controls involuntary actions. Those are actions that are not under our will, that are not under our control, that are not under our consciousness. Example: heart rate, breathing, digestion, gland functions such as salivary glands secreting saliva, peristalsis, ejaculation, blood circulation. These processes are part of our body's physiology, but we do not control. There are things we control and there are things we don't control even within the same body that we have. So things like digestion, we don't control. You put the food in your mouth. Putting food in your mouth is voluntary. You have volunteered to put the food in your mouth. Chewing the food is also voluntary because you have volunteered to chew. To volunteer means to do it willingly or willfully. It means you have chosen to do it. If you swallow, swallowing is also under your control because you choose to swallow. But then after swallowing, whatever happens to the food is none of your business. You don't control it. It is the responsibility of the body to carry on. It is the body's functions to actually carry on with the rest of the process. Then there is the somatic nervous system. What is the somatic nervous system? It is voluntary. The somatic nervous system is voluntary and controls voluntary actions or activities. So here, voluntary activities are activities that are under our control, activities that we do willingly, we choose to do it, when to do it, how to do it, how long we want to do it. Those activities are under our control. For example, running, you choose when to run, how fast you want to run. Jumping, you choose when to jump, how high you want to jump. Eating, you choose how to eat, how much food you want to put in your mouth, and how fast you want to eat. Walking, it's up to you to decide. You choose to walk, how fast you want to walk, and then how long you want to walk. So these are the system that is called the somatic nervous system. Then we have the autonomic part of the nervous system. We have the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic part of the nervous system is divided into two. So we have the sympathetic nervous system, and then there is the parasympathetic nervous system. All right, so now still on the autonomic part of the nervous system, of the peripheral nervous system, you have to know that it's divided into two systems. Actually, the exams guideline refers to it as a section. So there are two sections, the sympathetic section and then the parasympathetic section. Now we need to know these two sections, they work against each other, they oppose one another, hence the word they work or they are antagonistic to each other. So this is key for examination purposes. So the systems that are antagonistic to each other are the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic section of the autonomic nervous system. Then we take the autonomic nervous system. Remember, it consists of two branches, the sympathetic branch and then the parasympathetic branch. For the sympathetic branch, it prepares the body for emergency situations where a burst, a release of energy will be required. So any situation that demands the release of energy, that situation falls under the sympathetic branch. Example of such situations are when you are under attack or when you are attacking something. When you are under attack, you have to engage in flight. That's when you run from danger. Or when you are attacking, that is when you are fighting. That is when you are trying to overcome a situation. In both situations, energy is needed. And when energy is needed, you have to know energy comes from glucose. And for you to get energy from glucose, glucose will have to undergo cellular respiration inside the mitochondria. And lastly, we have the opposing system, which is the parasympathetic branch. And this branch becomes active when a person is restful, when the person is under ordinary situation, or after engaging in a fight or flight, the parasympathetic nervous system becomes active as it restores the body under ordinary restful condition. So you can tell what these two systems are doing. So, what are the differences between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system? So, you can tell here for sympathetic branch, it increases heart rate, but then the parasympathetic branch, it decreases heart rate. Sympathetic branch relaxes walls of bladder. The parasympathetic contracts the walls. The sympathetic dilates pupils. The parasympathetic constricts pupils. The sympathetic branch constricts arteries of the digestive system and the skin, while the parasympathetic dilates arteries of the digestive system Then the sympathetic branch increases blood pressure, and the parasympathetic decreases blood pressure. How are you going to study this? This is my recommendation. You have to choose one of these branches, and then you master it very well. If you choose to master sympathetic branch, then you focus on it. There are only 5 points. Then take note, the same structures you find under sympathetic are also under parasympathetic. What is the difference between the two? It's just their behavior or their responses. So over here, we have the heart. The heart is here. There is also a heart rate here. And what's the difference between the sympathetic branch and the para? Over here, the heart rate increases, and the opposite of increase is decrease. So that is it. Here there's an increase, here there's a decrease. The opposite of relax is contract. So we have the same structure here, bladder wall, but then they behave differently under each branch. Whereas the bladder walls relaxes, over here it contracts. And then we have the pupil. Over here it dilates, here it constricts. And again, here the arteries of the digestive system and the skin constrict. Here they dilate, because the opposite of constrict is dilate. And if the blood pressure doesn't increase, it will decrease. Hence, my recommendation that you need to master one side, know it very well. And then if the exam question is based on sympathetic branch, then you write it. If the question is rather on parasympathetic, but then you have mastered sympathetic, you just have to write the opposite, then you are fine. So let's look at this typical question. Describe how the sympathetic nervous system functions to prepare the body under stressful situation. When you come under attack or when you're in danger, the sympathetic nervous system takes over the situation, takes over your body. How does it prepare your body to function when you're under such a situation? So you need to first define and tell us about the sympathetic branch and what it does. It prepares the body for emergency situation in a flight or fight response where a release of energy will be needed. So in a situation where you need energy to fight or to flee, that is when the sympathetic branch takes over the body. And then during that situation, the following will occur. There will be an increase in heart rate, that the sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate. It stimulates vasoconstriction in the heart, in the skin, sorry. It increases blood pressure. It widens the bronchioles or increases breathing. The sympathetic branch decreases peristalsis. It causes relaxation of the blood wall, and then it stimulates sweat secretion. Lastly, it dilates pupil. So that is how the sympathetic branch prepares the body when a person is under attack or in danger. Now, the opposite is the case for the parasympathetic branch. After the danger is gone, if or when there is no danger, how does your body calms itself down, or how does it quiet itself down? Once the danger is gone, then the parasympathetic nervous system takes over the body and calms it. How does it do that? It restores the body to a restful, calm, quiet, and normal situation. For it to be restful, it means that before then you were irritated, or you were in fear, or you felt unsafe, hence you became agitated. But then when that danger is gone, your body becomes quiet, normal, and restful. And what happens? The parasympathetic section decreases heart rate. It dilates blood vessels in your skin, what is called vasodilation. It decreases blood pressure. It narrows the bronchioles or reduces breathing rate. It increases peristalsis during digestion. It causes contraction of the blood wall, and it also constricts the pupil of the eye. So this is a description of how the parasympathetic section functions to restore, calm, or quiet the body after an emergency situation. So again, you have the whole information here. One section is opposite the other. Remember that the two systems, they are antagonistic. They oppose one another. they can't agree on the same thing. Whereas one is increasing the heart rate, the other one will decrease the heart rate. Now, this is a paper one topic, and paper one topic consists of nervous system and the endocrine system. So you can see the last section here, it is stated that the sympathetic section stimulates secretion of adrenaline. Adrenaline is a hormone released from the adrenal gland on top of the kidney when an organism or when a person is under emergency situation. Same applies to the actions of the sympathetic nervous system. It prepares the person when the individual is under an emergency or a stressful situation. So if the adrenaline gland secretes adrenaline when the person is under emergency, the effect is the same as what the sympathetic system does. In other words, what I want you to know is that the effect of the sympathetic branch of the nervous system under a stressful situation is the same as the effect of the hormone adrenaline when released into the blood when the person is under a stressful situation. This hormone adrenaline will increase the person's heart rate. It will constrict blood vessel, increase blood pressure, widen the bronchioles, decrease peristalsis, cause relaxation of bladder wall, stimulate stress secretion, and dilate pupils. Hence, the functions of adrenaline on the body and the effects of the sympathetic branch on the body, they are one and the same thing. But then this is part of the endocrine system. This function here, this effect here is part of the endocrine system. And the whole of this, which is also part of the endocrine system, also falls under the nervous system. So we have two systems working together when a person is under emergency. Now we're going to shift our focus to the other parts of the nervous system which deals with the structure and functioning of a nerve. So we have to know the definition of a nerve. What is a nerve? Nerves are a bundle of neurons that transmit signals to and from all parts of the body. And we have either the sensory or the motor neuron. They are involved in doing that. So you need to know the definition carefully for terminology's sake. And you need to know the structure of a nerve. And then in doing so, we have to be able to tell the difference between a neuron and a nerve. What are neurons? They are specialized cells that make up and transmit impulses in the nervous system. That is the definition of a neuron. Then we go on to the types of neuron. How many types of neurons are there? And those that you need to know. So there are three types of neurons. The first is called sensory neuron. The second is interneuron. And the last one is motor neuron. Functions of the two neurons are very important, even though you have to also know the functions of the interneuron. So, moreover, for examination purposes, the parts and the structure of the sensory neuron and the motor neuron is something you need to know. You must be able to draw and label it. And when you are drawing it, you have to be able to label the nucleus, cell body, cytoplasm, myelin sheath, axon, and dendrite, just as I showed you earlier on in our study. So this is a typical motor neuron, something you need to practice how to draw and how to label it. And you must be able to state the functions of the individual parts. Anytime you draw, you must give it a title. This is a motor neuron. The title alone, structure for a typical motor neuron, just by the title, you're going to get a mark. And then the actual drawing to give you a mark. So even without labeling, you can get 2 marks just for the title, structure of a typical motor neuron. Don't just write motor neuron. You have to say structure of a typical motor neuron. That will give you a mark. And then the actual correct drawing, showing it the way it appears with the cell body on one side and an axon on the other side, will gain you another additional mark. Then any 3 labels will do, which will earn you 5 marks. So information within the nervous system is called an impulse. It is actually an electrochemical message that is transmitted within the nervous system. That is the only language the nervous system understands. So the nervous system understands the language of a nerve impulse. Hence, what is a nerve impulse? A nerve impulse are information transmitted through the nervous system. What is the nature? Nerve impulses travels as electrical signal and that is on and across the axon through ion charges, that is through positive and negative ions. Now there is a part of the neuron which is of great importance. So as you can see here, that is a typical motor neuron. And if you zoom it in, you will see this rod-like structure. That is the axon here. Here the label as the node of Rambia here is fine, but running through it is the axon. Then around the axon, you can see this bandage-like structure. This bandage-like structure is what is called the myelin sheath. Because there's a myelin sheath on this axon is called myelinated axon because there's a myelin sheath around it. Now, what are the functions of the myelin sheath? Why should neurons have myelin sheath around its axon? One, it insulates the axon because the myelin sheath is made of fat, and fat is a good insulator. And note that impulses are transmitted as electrical signals. So the myelin sheath actually insulates the axon. And then secondly, the myelin sheath speeds. So the key and the very most important word here is the word speeds. The myelin sheath speeds up the transmission of impulses across the axon. That should let you know that impulses can either travel fast or slowly across the axon. The speed at which an impulse travels across an axon is important because the speed can vary. The impulse can travel slowly across the axon, or it can travel quickly across the axon. In fact, electricity travels at the speed of light. It travels very, very fast, and that is how fast information across the nervous system is processed. So over here we have two neurons. There's something wrong about one of the neurons here, and you can only know that there's something wrong with one of the neurons by comparing it with the second one. So the one on top and the one at the bottom, they are all the same type of neuron, but then there is something wrong. If you check the axon of the neuron of the one on top and the axon of the neuron of the bottom one, you will notice that something is missing on the neuron on top. Over here there is an axon, over here too there's an axon, but then for the neuron below, you can see there is this rubber-like structure on it, and this rubber-like structure is what we call they are what we call myelin sheath. These are the myelin sheath. Okay, they are there to speed up the transmission of impulses so that the impulse will travel quickly across the axon. It is also there to insulate the axon. But if you check here, there's an individual with motor neurons, and unfortunately, there are no myelin sheath on the axon. So we say this axon is unmyelinated, meaning it lacks myelin sheath around it. This axon is myelinated because you can see it has myelin sheath. So what will be the consequence of having a lot of axon without myelin sheath in the nervous system of a person? It will slow down the transmission of nerve impulses because the purpose of myelin sheath is to speed up the transmission of impulses. If there are no myelin sheath around an axon, the transmission of impulses will be slow. So what about this neuron? Because it is a perfectly intact neuron, how will the speed of the transmission of impulses be? Here, it will speed up the transmission of impulses because the axon is myelinated. Then that will lead us to the consequence of having either of this. If you have more of this than this, that means your transmission of impulses within your body will be very fast, and this will be expressed in your behavior and in your thinking and your action. But what if a person develops this type of neurons as he or she grows up? What will be the consequence? So here, we look at the consequence of unmyelinated axon. It leads to a health condition called multiple sclerosis. So those are the two diseases of the nervous system that you need to know. Remember, we talk about the diagram, structure, functions, processes, and then diseases. So this is one of the two diseases under the nervous system. There are only two that you need to know for examination's sake. So this is multiple sclerosis. It is caused by unmyelinated axon. We're going to find out the real cause. So let's look at multiple sclerosis. What is it? It is the damage or degradation of the axon coating myelin sheath of nerve cells in communication pathway. So multiple sclerosis is simply when the axon becomes demyelinated, or it is also defined as scattered patches of demyelination in the pathways that makes it impossible for messages to move across these hard areas. What is the cause? Multiple sclerosis is caused by, simply put, autoimmune disease. What is an autoimmune disorder? It is when the immune system starts to attack itself. In this particular case, the immune system is attacking the brain cells, specifically the neurons. What are the symptoms? If there are no, if there are a lot of demyelinated neurons in the nervous system of the person, the transmission of impulses will slow down. Hence, the person will have experience difficulty in walking, loss of speech or vision, fatigue, bladder and bowel problems, pain, concentration and memory loss problems, mood swings, and those are the other symptoms. Now let's take the individual neuron, because you have to know the functions of the neurons and the effect if they are damaged. The motor neuron, that is it on your screen. What does it do? It transmits impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors, that is the muscles or glands. And how does it produce an effect in the person? This neuron enables a person to respond or react to stimuli. So the functions end starts here and ends here. Those separate the two. This is the functions within the central nervous system. This is the effect of this neuron working in your body. This neuron allows you to walk, allows you to jump, allows you to do anything. Anything that involves movement is carried out by this neuron. In fact, the word motor means movement. So this is a neuron in charge of movement. It allows you to move, to act. And hence, what will be the consequence if it is damaged? If the motor neuron is damaged, like you can see in your screen, you can see a part of it is actually gone, or you can see the nucleus is gone, or you can see that something is wrong with the with the cell in one way or the other. If it happens like that, if it happens that the motor neuron is damaged, what will be the consequence? You simply have to write the same functions, but then you have to insert in the words will not be. So you simply say impulses will not be transmitted from the CNS to the effectors. So what will be the final consequence? The person will not be able to react to stimuli, because this neuron allows a person to react to stimuli. But then because it is damaged, you just have to insert the words. The person will not be able to react to stimuli. Then we go to sensory. What does it do? We take the functions again. It transmits impulses from the receptors to the central nervous system. What are the effects in the body? It enables a person to feel stimulus, example, pain, heat, etc. Then we go on to the opposite. What will be the consequence if it is damaged? So if it is damaged, check, you put in the same words, the neuron will not be able to detect and to transmit impulses from where the receptors to the CNS. That is the functions of the sensory neuron. It transmits impulses from it detects and transmits impulses from the receptor to the CNS, but because it is damaged, it will not be able to do that. Hence, the person, instead of feeling stimulus, because the neuron is damaged, the person will not feel the stimulus, and that is it. But then you have to be able to recognize a damaged neuron. So if you see a neuron like this, you have to know this neuron is damaged. Okay, that means that the person will not be able to feel stimulus. Now, what if you have a degenerated neuron, whether sensory or motor neuron? If they are damaged, if the neurons themselves are damaged, what will be the consequence? It will lead to a health condition called Alzheimer's disease. So what is an Alzheimer's disease? What is it? We need to know what it is. It usually affects overaged people, people who are over 65 years. It can still develop at an early age, as we have been made aware. It is characterized by loss of neurons, synapses in the cortex of the brain, as well as the presence of clumps of protein, amyloid plaques, and tangled fibers of bundles of fibers. The main symptoms of Alzheimer's disease are memory loss and confusion. So Alzheimer's disease is caused by degeneration of the neurons. Remember, multiple sclerosis is caused by degradation of the myelin sheath, not the neuron itself. So there's a difference between the two. Then we go on to the third neuron, which is not required for examination purposes in terms of structure. You have to know only the functions. What it does is that it connects and transmits nerve impulses from the sensory to the motor neuron in the nervous system. So here are the three neurons. That is a sensory neuron, that is the interneuron, and that is the motor neuron. They all follow in that order. And according to the exams guide, these are the things we need to know. We have to know simple reflex arc, and in doing so, we have to know the definition of a reflex action and a reflex arc. When they are put together like this, it can be formatted into an exams question where you have to differentiate between reflex action and reflex arc. If you are called to differentiate, you just have to draw a table. But take note, you have to know their definition. So these are viable terminology. Secondly, you have to know the structure of a reflex arc. That is, you have to know it when you see it. And in doing so, you gotta use a diagram. So you have to use a diagram to know the structure. You should be able to draw. And then also, you have to know the functions. You have to know the functions of each part of the reflex arc. And we have been given the parts. So we have receptor here. Then from receptor, we go to sensory. Then we go to the dorsal root of the spinal nerve, then to the spinal cord itself, then to the interneuron. After interneuron, we go to motor neuron. Then we go to the ventral root of the spinal nerve, and lastly, the effector. Then you have to also know the functioning, how the reflex act functions in a simple reflex action. And you must be able to use an example for that purposes using an example. So you should be able to give examples of reflex action. And then we have to also know significance of a reflex action. How important is that process? And the importance of synapse, the same as significance of synapse. These are stuff you need to know as we move on. Then we also have to know the disorders of the CNS. You've just looked at it. There are two things to know about it. You have to know the causes and the symptoms. You don't have to know any other thing. The definition or the description is not necessary. All you need to know is the cause of Alzheimer's disease and multiple sclerosis, and also the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and multiple sclerosis. Lastly, we have to know about receptors. You have to know the functions of receptors. You have to know neurons and effectors in responding to the environment. You have to know the functions of a receptor, a neuron, and an effector. Then finally, we have to also know the body responds to a variety of different stimuli, such as light, sound, touch, temperature, pressure, pain, chemicals, that is taste and smell. No structure and names necessary except for names of the receptors in the eye and in the ear. So that is a key thing you need to know as you prepare to write. All right, so here we are. We have communication among the three types of neurons. So now all the three types of neurons are together. We have the first one here, the second one here, and the third one here. So this first neuron here, check the structure. Okay, you can see the cell body is located somewhere around the middle, and then there is the dendrite on one side and the axon. Both the dendrite and the axon are myelinated. There's a myelin sheet around the dendrite and then the axon. This is what is called the sensory neuron. Then just next to it is the interneuron, and there is no contact between the two. They do not touch one another. They are just suspended in the air, and there's a gap between the two, a microscopic gap. Then after the interneuron, there is the motor neuron. So the motor neuron, this is how it looks like. It looks totally different from the sensory neuron. The cell body is on one side, and the dendrites are very short, but then there are many. Over here, there is only one dendrite. That's the dendrite here, only one, and with several, just some few branches here, but it has one thick dendrite and then one axon. And then over here, that is the axon. Axon is very short, it's very long, sorry, and the cell body is directly connected to many dendrites. So there are many dendrites, multiple dendrites around the cell body. So this is what the whole thing looks like. Again, the interneuron and the motor neuron, they do not touch. So there is a gap between them. That section that you are seeing here, there's also a gap here. So there's a gap here, there's a gap here. This is where the two neurons meet one another, but they don't touch. And this gap is what is called a synapse. So this is what it looks like when you have two neurons meeting together, but they do not touch. So you can see this is actually an axon and a dendrite. Information is transmitted from axon, then it goes to the dendrite, and the dendrite will take it to the cell body, process it, and then transmit it along the axon. And it's very, very fast. So this gap, this space here, a microscopic gap, is what is called a synapse. What then is a synapse? A synapse is a junction or a gap between two neurons consisting of a minute microscopic gap across which impulses pass by diffusion of neurotransmitters. So for an impulse to move from one neuron to another, that is from an axon to a dendrite, it does so by diffusion. Substances in the body, they move by diffusion. Majority of substances in the body move by diffusion, except water. Water moves by osmosis. So that is what you should know. Why should there be a synapse? What is importance of a synapse? Why must there be a gap within between two neurons? So one, it allows impulses to be transmitted in one direction, and since neurotransmitters are present on one side of the axon only, so there are two neurons here. Okay, here we have the axon, and then there's a dendrite. Over here, there are neurotransmitters. Over here, there are no neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are only located on one side of the neurons only. Hence, impulses only travel in one direction. They can only go in one direction. They can't go in the reverse because there are no neurotransmitters on the other side of the neuron. The neurotransmitters are only found on the axon. There are no neurotransmitters in the dendrite. So the dendrite cannot transmit information to the neurotransmitters because it lacks the dendrite cannot transmit impulses to the what do you call it the axon because it lacks neurotransmitters. Then lastly, the last importance of the synapse is that it prevents overstimulation of a nerve, as it ensures impulses move in one direction only. So it prevents overstimulation. That is, an impulse going to and fro, it leads to unnecessary stimulation. So this is what is called the synapse junction. The neurotransmitters are those round vesicles you are seeing. They are found only on one side of the neuron, that is the axon side. There are no neurotransmitters on the dendrite side. Hence, the dendrite cannot transmit information in the opposite direction. Information cannot go in reverse. It can only go forward. It can only flow from axon to dendrite. It cannot go from dendrite to axon because there are no neurotransmitters in the dendrite to send information to the axon by diffusion. Then, if we put all these three neurons together, that's sensory, transmitting information to inter, and then from interneuron to motor neuron, what we need to know is that the interneuron is mostly situated inside the spinal cord. When you have a situation like this, you can see something is missing. We don't have the brain here. We have only the sensory interneuron in the spinal cord and the motor neuron. And at the beginning, we studied the fact that the nervous system consists of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And then we explored the fact that the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. So these are two important structures that are involved in making decisions or in the decision-making process of the body. The brain can take a decision for the body, and the spinal cord too can take a decision for the body. So the spinal cord and the brain, they are both actually an intelligent part of the human body. They can both think, but then their mechanism of doing things are different. Decision making by the brain and by the spinal cord, they differ in a sense that here, when you have a situation like this where the brain is nowhere to be found because I did not put it here, and then I did not put it there for a good reason. The reason I did not put it there because you have the spinal cord. And once you have the spinal cord in charge, that means the brain can't do anything or the brain will not be needed. If the brain is not needed, who makes the decision? The decision is taken by spinal cord. And see how the spinal cord takes decision. The speed of response with regards to the spinal cord is very quick. Decision making by the spinal cord is very quick and it's also automatic. Meaning it is self-operating. Automatic means it is self-operating, it's very fast. In this situation, you can't think over it because the brain is not involved. Why is the brain not involved in this situation? It's because it is done in this way to prevent any further damage or harm. That is when the organism is under stressful situation or under danger, and the individual needs to be protected, or the organism has to be protected. This protection does not demand unnecessary thinking process that is mostly done by the brain. So once the person is under danger and the person senses that the organism might not survive, the spinal cord takes over and then makes the decision. And the decision is very quick and is automatic and is done to prevent any further damage or harm to the affected part of the organism. And this is very, very key, and this is very important. This is what normally happens when you step on a needle and then you just jump without thinking, or you are being chased by dogs and then you jump over a gutter or you jumped over a wall, something you could not have done had you stood there to think about it. But then when you're under stressful situation, when you're under danger, your spinal cord takes over so that you can actually exercise your superhuman ability. You can do things that you wouldn't have been able to do naturally. In other words, you can do things without thinking. If you think about it, you won't be able to do it. Like you want to jump a wall. If you think about it, you won't be able to jump it. But when you are being chased by something, when you're being pursued by danger, you will now jump. What caused you to jump? It wasn't your brain. It was a spinal cord that took over your body, that took control to allow you to do that. Such mechanisms is what is called the reflex action. It's called reflex action or involuntary action. Involuntary because you did not volunteer to do it. To volunteer means you chose to do it. You did not choose to do it. You just did it. And you did it without thinking about it, without planning. Because once you start thinking, your brain will start doubting. You start asking yourself questions. I can do it. I can't do it. Will I be able to do it? What if? What if? What if this happened? What if that happened? Once you start questioning yourself, once you start saying what if or what if this or what if that, that is doubt. And once you doubt yourself, you can't do anything extraordinary. So for survival's sake, under such a situation and a situation between life and death, where the survival of the organism depends on the decision the organism will take next. In such a situation, the spinal cord overcomes or suppresses the brain and takes over the situation because the spinal cord is like a brain on its own. It's able to also think, but then the thinking process is very quick and very automatic, and it always achieves the expected objective. The decisions of the spinal cord prevents any harm or it protects the organism. But then guess what? If the information goes to the brain, once the brain is involved, then it means the brain will receive the information. If there is danger, the brain will see the danger, interpret the impulse, and then send a decision. And guess what? The response is very slow and it's not automatic. It's not something that is operating on its own. You are going to do it. It is you Once it becomes you, the conscious you, who is taking the decision, who is trying to run, who is trying to fight, then we don't call it anymore as reflex action. Now the process is said to be voluntary because you have chosen to do it. If you choose to do it, if the brain takes command, if the brain takes control over the situation, then the spinal cord will leave the scene. The spinal cord won't be there anymore. And whatever will happen to your body is up to you. In such situation, the organism might survive or the organism might not survive. So, anytime the brain is involved, that is when you start overthinking, over questioning, and you generate or create doubt. Once you doubt yourself, everything becomes 50-50. You are between survival or not surviving. And this is called voluntary action. So voluntary action always involves the brain. Decisions are taken by the brain, and the response is very slow and not automatic. But then involuntary actions, decisions are taken by the spinal cord. It does not involve the brain. Only the spinal cord takes the decision, and the response is very quick, and then it's very, very automatic. So there we have it. So that will take us to reflex action. And remember, we have to know the definition of reflex action and reflex act. And what is a reflex action? It's a quick automatic response to stimulus, and it occurs without the involvement of the brain. This process is processed by the spinal cord. And then examples, we have knee jerk, sneezing, quickly removing a body part away from danger to prevent further damage. Remember, the examination guide spoke about examples of simple reflex acts. So here you are, knee jerk, squeezing, blinking of your eye is an example of reflex action. Why should you blink? If a particle falls on your eye, it might damage your eye. So your eye blinks quickly to prevent any further damage. You don't choose to blink. It is done quickly by the autonomic component, by your spinal cord. It does so by your by the autonomic component of your body, using with the help of the peripheral nervous system. What about reflex act? It is the path along which an impulse is transmitted to bring about a response to a stimulus during reflex action. So these are definitions and examples which are key stuff you need to know. So why the brain is not involved in reflex action? We have to know the definition because reflex action is supposed to be quick, that is rapid or fast, and also automatic to respond to stimuli, and it occurs without the involvement of the brain because the response speed needs to be quick. Involving the brain will slow it down. Also, the responses are automatic and do not require conscious thought. Conscious thought means it is voluntary. You have to think about it. This ensures the reason why the brain is not involved is to ensure survival. Hence, involving the brain will delay the process time to the stimuli, which may cause further harm or damage. That means involving the brain in certain situation might lead to further harm and damage. That's why it's not every good thing. It's not good to always think about everything. Sometimes you must just let the system operate on its own. So remember, reflex action is supposed to be quick and rapid. So we have a neuron here, which is unmyelinated. It slows down the transmission of impulses. It will make the response very slow. This neuron is myelinated. It will make the response very quick. So which of these two neurons will support reflex action? It's going to be this neuron because this neuron will speed up transmission of impulse. It will cause impulses to travel quickly. This will cause impulses to travel slowly. So this neuron is not good for reflex action, but this neuron is good for reflex action. And the consequence of unmyelinated axon leads to a condition called multiple sclerosis. And take note, we have, remember the exam guys, you have to know the definition of receptors. What are receptors? They are specialized organs or tissues that detects and converts stimuli into an impulse and then transmit it across a sensory neuron. Receptors transmit impulses to sensory neuron. What are effectors? They are specialized tissues, muscles, or glands. They receive a nerve impulse from the motor neuron to bring about a response. Effectors, they always receive impulses from motor neuron. So here we are. If we join all the three neurons together, we have stimulus coming in, it goes straight to the receptor, which is the skin or the nose or the ear or the eyes or the tongue. Then it converts it into an impulse. It is transmitted across the sensory neuron along the dorsal root of the spinal nerve, and then it enters into the spinal cord where it goes into the interneuron. Then the spinal cord takes a decision. There's a diagram of the spinal cord. Take note of the fact that it goes through the top part of the spinal cord, this region here, this dark area here, not black but dark area here. That is the dorsal root. Dorsal means the top part, and this is the lower part of the spinal cord. That's the ventral root. So the interneuron, the decision is taken. The interneuron transfer the decision across the synapse. You see, there's a gap here and there's a gap here. That's the synapse, and then the information goes through the motor neuron, and the motor neuron will transmit it via the ventral. Ventral means the lower part. This part here of this part of the spinal cord is the lower part. This is the upper part, and this is the lower part of the ventral part of the spinal nerve across the motor neuron. Then it goes to the effector. The effector can be a gland or it can be your muscle, and it will cause a response. So this is a diagram of your spinal cord. This is the upper part of your spinal cord. The upper part is called the dorsal part or the dorsal root. This is the lower part of your spinal cord. This lower part is called the ventral root. Impulses goes first through the dorsal root. Okay, it enters the spinal cord through the dorsal root of your sensory neuron. This is how a sensory neuron is drawn. The cell body is on one side, and then there is the dendrite, and then there is the axon. And then the impulse will travel into the dorsal root. It looks like a horn. This structure that looks like a horn, it continues in this structure. That's the dorsal root. And then the spinal cord will take a decision. Inside the spinal cord is the interneuron. Then the interneuron will transfer the information across a synapse, and then it will enter through the ventral root, the lower part, the lower root of the spinal cord, and it will now be channeled across the motor neuron to the effector to bring about a response. So information goes through the dorsal root, and then it exits the spinal cord through the ventral root. So if you take the structure of a reflex arc, it consists of 5 components: receptor, sensory, interneuron, motor neuron, and effector. And if you take their first letters, it creates this abbreviation RSIME. That is SIM. SIM. The middle is SIM. You put R here, you put E here. You have reflex arc. Everything starts with receptor, sensory, inter, motor, E, and then effector. And then you are done with the process. So everything starts here. That's a receptor. Here, the receptor is your skin. The receptor refers to the 5 sensory organs. It can be your skin, it can be your nose, it can be your tongue, it can be your ears, it can be your eyes. They are all receptors. So the skin is a receptor. It receives the stimulus. Here, the stimulus will be heat. The heat stimulus will cause pain, and then the receptor will convert the heat stimulus into an impulse, which will be sent along the sensory neuron, and it will enter into the spinal cord through the dorsal root, and then from there it will pass over a synapse, and then inside it will enter the interneuron. Now the impulse is in the spinal cord. You can see the brain is not here because the process is actually involuntary. It needs an autonomic response, and the response will have to be quick and automatic. Including the brain will slow the process down. And because the stimulus will damage the skin, the brain is not supposed to be involved to take a decision because it will slow down the process and it will lead to further damage. Hence, the spinal cord takes the decision, and the decision is transmitted along the interneuron across a synapse, a microscopic gap here, so that the impulse will travel in one direction. Then the impulse will leave the spinal cord through the ventral roots and then along the motor neuron. Motor neuron is involved in movement, and then the motor neuron will now transmit the information to the effector. The effector can be a muscle or a gland. A muscle or a gland. Okay, a receptor can be anything. The 5 sensory organs. It can be your skin, It can be your nose, it can be your eyes, it can be your ears, and then it can be your tongue. Those are the 5 receptors. They are the same as they're also called the sensory organs. But then the effectors, there are 2 of them. We have your muscles. Majority of the effectors are muscles because motor neuron is involved in movement. In fact, the word motor means movement, and muscles are the main structures involved in movement. But then aside muscles, there are also glands. So majority of the movement, when it comes to such a stimulus like this, it demands that you have to move your hand. For your hand to move, you need a muscle, and muscles are mostly drawn like this. Always you have to know, you start with the stimulus and follow the line carefully. Don't get it confused. Follow the line, and the line will take you through the right path. And look out for the abbreviation RSIME. So let's look at the description. First of all, receptor receives the stimulus, whether it's heat, light, pain, and converts it to an impulse. The impulse is then transmitted by the sensory neuron through the dorsal root of the spinal nerve to the spinal cord, and where the impulse is transmitted via the interneuron to the motor neuron, which carries the impulse via ventral root to the effector or muscle or gland. And then the impulse is transferred from one neuron to another via synapse. So you have just placed all the 5 words: R, receptor; S, sensory; I, interneuron; and then M for motor neuron; and then E for effector. So we put everything into perspective. This is how it works. This is a stimulus. It can be heat, needle, light, or anything that triggers a response. And it is then detected by your receptor. The receptors are your 5 organs, the 5 sensory organs, or the 5 organs of your senses. And over here, your skin will be the main organ. If you step on a nail, your skin will detect the stimulus and convert it to an impulse. And then there it is. These are your sensory organs. It can be your skin, your eyes, your ears, your tongue, your nose. And then it will your receptors, these structures, these sensory organs will convert it into a nerve impulse. And then this nerve impulse is transmitted via the dorsal root of the sensory neuron, and then it goes on straight across a synapse to the interneuron. So the impulse will jump over a synapse and then to enter the interneuron. And over there, remember, the interneuron is already located inside the spinal cord. Okay, so here the spinal cord takes the decision, and then the decision is transmitted across another synapse, which joins the interneuron to the ventral root of the motor neuron, and then the impulse is transmitted along the motor neuron to the effectors. So in this particular case, because you step on a nail and it was your feet that stepped on it, your leg muscles will have to contract to pull your feet away. Hence, the effectors here will be muscles, and what will happen? It will cause your knee to jerk, and this process will occur. You can see the brain is nowhere here. We don't have the brain here because the brain will slow the whole process down, and it will make it automatic, because the process is supposed to be automatic. It's supposed to be involuntary, meaning it is not under your conscious thought. You don't have to think about it consciously. But here the process will happen unconsciously. So you're going to lift your leg unconsciously from the needle. All right, so here is a simple diagram representing reflex arc. It always starts with the sensory organs. One of the sense organs is the skin. The skin is one of the sense organs, and then it detects and converts the impulse the stimuli into an impulse. Is then transmitted along the sensory across the dorsal root. It enters the spinal cord, and the innate decision is taking. Information is transmitted across the synapse into the interneuron. Then the information leaves the spinal cord via the synapse over through the ventral root of the spinal cord across the motor neuron. Remember, the motor neuron is also called efferent. You have to stick to one word to avoid confusion. So stick to the sensory and motor, not efferent and efferent. Though they are both correct, but if you can, it's fine. Over here, there's an arrow to follow to avoid confusion. Whilst you are tracing the path, remember the formula, the abbreviation we use, RSIME. That is what you need to use. And then it's going to end with an effector. And this is an effector. This represents our muscle. That's how it is drawn. Remember the previous diagram? That is how you draw a muscle. Same thing applies here. There's a stimulus. That's the skin as a sense organ. Follow the arrow, and it goes all the way to the dorsal root, then through the sensory neuron, enters the spinal cord via a synapse into the interneuron. Decision is taken, is transmitted across the synapse, across the ventral root, then goes on through the motor neuron. You follow the arrow, and then here we have that is the effector. The effector here is drawn as a muscle, and the muscle will contract and withdraw parts being stimulated. Same thing happens here. See how the effector is drawn. This is how a muscle is drawn. And this is actually a sense organ, and that is a skin. And the process follows in the same path. These are the three neurons joined together. We have sensory, inter, and motor neuron. In some exam question, they'll ask you to draw this neuron. This is or neuron L or neuron V or neuron W. And remember earlier on, I instructed you to practice how to draw a neuron. So yes, this is it. Reflex arc. Again, remember we have the eye, and a receptor is any of the five sensory organs, and the eye is a receptor. So it receives the impulse, and then if the impulse goes to the brain, it is no longer reflex action because the decision making is conscious. You are aware. It's your brain doing the thinking, and the process will be slow and not automatic. Though the effector can still be influenced by it, you will still take the apple and eat it, but then you did so consciously. But what if you take it without thinking? If you take it without thinking, that means the brain is not involved. You only have the spinal cord. That means the information went to the receptor and then went to the sensory neuron through the dorsal root of the spinal nerve. It enters into the spinal cord through the interneuron. And here, the decision making is rapid and involuntary. So if you take this channel, that means you are dealing with reflex action. And it is reflex action because the brain is not involved. This information can either go to the brain or it can ignore the brain and go straight to the spinal cord. And once it goes to the spinal cord, it will end up in the same route to the muscle. That is, motor neuron will always connect to the effector, which is a muscle, which will cause your hand to move. So the two systems are here. We have reflex action here, which is involuntary, and then we have voluntary. In other words, we have involuntary action and voluntary action. So this one is voluntary action, sorry, and then this one is involuntary action. This one is reflex action. This is not reflex action. There's no reflex action happening here because you can see the brain is here. Once you have the brain, the process is going to be slow and it won't be automatic because you are going to think about it. You are aware. Aware means you are conscious of it. That means you are going to pick the food consciously. Over here, the person picked the food unconsciously. The person did so without thinking. Yeah, it is like you stole it without thinking. Right? It's like your hand pick it up. You just pick it up. And we ask you, why did you take it up? So, I don't know why I took it up. I just took it up. Who took it up? It was your hand that took it up. What were you thinking? Well, I did not think about it. So who did the thinking? You will blame it on the spinal cord because over here, the process was rapid and you were not conscious. You were not aware of it. So that is a beautiful diagram showing you two different processes joined together. One is conscious, one is unconscious. You have to know which one is conscious, which one is not conscious, which one is involuntary. This one is reflex action. This one is voluntary action. This one is voluntary because you chose to do it. That one is voluntary, one is involuntary. Another word for voluntary is reflex action. Now, why do we need a reflex action in the body? So we need reflex action for the following. It allows a quick response by removing a body part away from danger to prevent further harm. It also minimizes any damage to the body from potentially harmful conditions. And then you need to know the functions of a receptor, neuron, effector, and as they are involved in responding to stimuli. And then lastly, we have to know the types of stimuli that you need to know for examination purposes. That is light. Light is detected by receptors in the eye, not the eye as an organ, but then specifically a part of the eye called the rods and the cones. These are the photoreceptors. And then for examination purposes, you have to know about sound as a stimulus, which is detected by the ear. The ear performs two functions. It allows us to hear sound and also to maintain balance. But then, not every part of the ear is involved in detecting sound. There is only a small area in the ear that allows us to detect sound, and that part is called the organ of Corti. So to see light, you need cones and rods. To hear sound, you need the organ of Corti. So this brings us to the conclusion of the matter. The next study will focus on the human eye, where we'll look at the structure and functions of the part of the eye using a diagram, binocular vision and its importance, changes that occur in the eye for each of the following using diagrams, that is accommodation and pupillar mechanism, and then nature and treatment of the following visual defects using diagrams, short-sightedness, long-sightedness, astigmatism, and cataract. I have done a video presentation on it. Make sure you go through it following the exams guide. And then also the human ear, which deals with the structure of the human ear and its functions, again using diagram. Function of the human ear in hearing, that includes organ of Corti. You don't have to know the detailed structure. And balance, that includes the maculae and then the cristae without details of the diagram. And then the cause and treatment of the following diseases or hearing defects, middle ear infection, and how the grommet is used. Or you don't have to know the how, actually, you only use the grommets. And deafness, it is treated using hearing aids and cochlear implants. So this is the exam guide. Make sure you go through it, you study using the information here, and it's going to make everything simple for you. So that is end of part 1 and 2. The next section will focus on the eye, and then that is part 2, and part 3 will be the ear. So make sure you follow that for your revision sake. All the best to you, and thank you for watching.